make yourselves comfortable at the tables here. It'll make us feel like the event is more of a dialogue and less of a shouting match. So any of you who feel like you've got lots of tables here, do come forward. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Head. I'm the BBC's Southeast Asia correspondent and on the board of the Foreign Correspondents Club. So if there are any of you here for whom this place is new or unfamiliar, or if you're not members, come back as often as you like. We're open to everyone, and do think about joining the club. We rely on our members and our membership dues, and it is really worth it. You get a big discount on the food and drinks and free entry to all of our events, and we are trying very hard in this post-COVID environment to have as many events in the club as possible and to get the crowds back that we used to have before that. Just before I introduce tonight's event and speakers, just to let you know things that are coming up. On Friday, we have, any of you who are quiz-minded, trivia night. You're welcome to come on your own and then join teams. It's fiendishly challenging. We have a fantastic quiz master. It's a great Friday evening. Next week, we have our regular chess night on Tuesday. If you're a chess aficionado, the whole tone of the club changes when they're here. It gets very serious and silent. And on Thursday, the Malaysian opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim will be in Bangkok, and he's going to come and speak to the club, to journalists and members at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday the 22nd. It's a great opportunity. We've not been able to get Anwar back to the club for a very long time. There was, of course, a period when he was in prison and we couldn't do it. And as Malaysia is due to face a general election very soon, it'll definitely be worth hearing from him. He's often called the eternal Prime Minister in waiting. He's been waiting a long time for the job, and I think this may be his last chance. But let's get straight on to tonight's event. A look at this report that's been launched called A State of Collapse, looking at the legal system, the judicial system in Myanmar. And I will say as a journalist that we, as we've covered the events in Myanmar since the coup in February last year, have sometimes been guilty of dismissing the legal system in Myanmar as a farce. And when you look at the way that people are treated, the secretiveness of legal proceedings, the bizarre charges, and in particular the charade that they have put Aung San Suu Kyi through, where you can't know anything at all about her trials. You know, I've tended to tell my editors, forget the judicial proceedings. She's a political prisoner. She's in as long as they want her to be in, and it doesn't matter what they sentence her to. But the fact remains that, as is mentioned in this report, you know, the weaponization of the judiciary, it's a phrase we're familiar with in this region. It's happened in many countries that these days authoritarian governments prefer to use the judiciary to give themselves cover as a way of repressing dissent. But in Myanmar, particularly since the coup, they've taken it to a whole new level. But the military still chooses to use the legal system. There are still legal procedures that people go through when they're charged. There are lawyers trying very hard to defend them, and it's probably one of the few areas where something can be done to improve the lot of people who are arrested and banged up in insane prison or any of the others. So it's a very important report, this, looking at the ways in which the legal system operates now, what's happened to it, and at the ways in which it can be supported and helped. It will make a significant difference to the very many people who have been charged and detained. So we've got a panel that's brought together really with the support of the ICJ. It's their event. I should say this report is not authored by them. It's authored by independent experts. But obviously it gives us a lot of material to work with. So we're very pleased to invite Sam Zia Zarifi from the ICJ, the Secretary General of the ICJ, back. Of course, he'll be familiar to those of you who've lived in Bangkok, as I have for a while. He was here for many years and a regular attendant and speaker at the club. He's been Secretary General of the ICJ since 2017. He's based in Geneva now. He's an Iranian-American lawyer with more than 20 years' experience in human rights, and previously worked for Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch on human rights emergencies in the Asia region, right from Iran and Iraq over to the countries of ASEAN. We've also got online coming in on Zoom tonight, Kin Omar, Any of you who cover events in Myanmar will be very familiar with Kin Omar's work. She's been a human rights campaigner since the 1988 uprising when she was a student activist. And for the past 30 years, she's been living in exile, but campaigning continuously for democracy and improved human rights in Myanmar, and the founder of a number of civil society organizations, including the Women's League of Burma, the Burma Partnership and Progressive Voice, which is where she works now. We're also very pleased to have back speaking at the club Wei Nu, a Rohingya Burmese activist, again very well known to those of us who cover Myanmar. She's the director and founder of the Women's Peace Network and was a political prisoner for 7 years under the previous military government, and she's become a national and international voice for human rights in Myanmar. She was particularly motivated to do this after coming out of prison and seeing the escalating violence, in particular, of course, directed against the Rohingya people after 2012. And we also are very pleased to have Jackie Zalkberg, who's a human rights officer at the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, and a legal advisor to Tom Andrews. He's the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar, has been one of the most outspoken officials and one of the most visible voices demanding international action, which of course there's been very little of on Myanmar. So those are our four speakers. I'm going to start off. I think we have a video to show, a short video that's been made, which will give you an oversight of the challenges of the legal system, and then we'll get Sam to lead off with the speakers. Thank you. Tam?
ဖွဲ့စည်းပုံအခြေခံဥပဒေ2008ခုနှစ်ပုံမှာ419ရာနိုင်ငံတော်အားအရေးပေါ်အခြေအနေကြေညာလိုက်သည်
2021 February အာဏာသိမ်းပြီးတဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းမှာတချို့ဥပဒေတွေကိုပြောင်းလဲလိုက်တယ်။အဖမ်းခံရတဲ့သူတယောက်ကစတင်ဖမ်းဆီးခံရတဲ့အချိန်ကနေစပြီးတော့မှဝန်ခံထွက်ဆိုခြင်းမပြုဘဲနဲ့စိတ်နေပိုင်ခွင့်ဆိုတဲ့အခွင့်အရေးရှိပါတယ်။ဆွဆွဲခံရတဲ့သူတွေကိုညှဉ်းပန်းနှိပ်စက်ပိုင်ခွင့်မရှိပါဘူး။ရှေ့နေနဲ့ခုခံချေပပိုင်ခွင့်လည်းရှိပါတယ်။ဥပဒေရဲ့အကာအကွယ်တွေကိုလည်းတန်းတူရပိုင်ခွင့်ရှိပါတယ်။အာဏာသိမ်းပြီးတဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းမှာစစ်ကောင်စီကဥပဒေတော်တော်များများကိုပြင်လိုက်တယ်။သူတို့ပြင်လိုက်တဲ့ဟာတွေကပြည်သူတွေအတွက်ဘာမှအကျိုးမရှိခဲ့ပါဘူး။သူတို့အလွယ်တကူအုပ်ချုပ်လို့ရအောင်ပြင်ခဲ့တာဖြစ်ပါတယ်။ရာဇသက်ကြီးထဲမှာပြဋ္ဌာန်းထားတဲ့124ကိုပြောင်းလဲလိုက်တယ်။နိုင်ငံတော်အစိုးရကိုပုံကမယ်ဆိုရင်ဒီပုံမှန်တွေနဲ့အရေးယူဆောင်ရမယ်။လူပြောများနေတဲ့905ဆိုရင်အများပြည်သူစိတ်အနှောက်အယှက်ဖြစ်စေတဲ့ပုံမှန်ပေါ့နော်။ထောင်ဒဏ်က2နှစ်လောက်ပဲရှိတဲ့အတွက်အာမခံလို့ရတဲ့အမှုဖြစ်တယ်။အခုကျတော့905ကကြီးဆိုပြီးထပ်ပြန်လိုက်တယ်။ထောင်ဒဏ်ကို3နှစ်အထိပြဋ္ဌာန်းလိုက်တယ်။3နှစ်ဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်ဒါဟာအာမခံလို့မရတဲ့ပုံမှန်ဖြစ်သွားတယ်။ဘယ်တော့ဆိုရင်ဒီပုံမှန်တွေကရဲရေးမပိုင်ဘူး။ရဲရေးမပိုင်တဲ့အမှုဆိုတော့ဝရမ်းမပါပဲဖမ်းလို့မရဘူး။အဲ့ဒါတွေကိုအခုရဲရေးပိုင်တဲ့အမှုဖြစ်သတ်မှတ်လိုက်တယ်။ရဲရေးပိုင်တဲ့အမှုဖြစ်သွားတဲ့အတွက်အချိန်မရွေးဖမ်းလို့ရတယ်
။ညတာရဲ့တရားခွင်နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ပထမဦးဆုံးနဲ့အရေးကြီးဆုံးကဥပဒေနဲ့အညီခုခံခြေပပိုင်ခွင့်ပဲဖြစ်တယ်။ဥပဒေနဲ့အညီခုခံခြေပပိုင်ခွင့်ဆိုတဲ့နေရာမှာရှေ့နေတဲ့ငါးရင်ခုခံပိုင်ခွင့်ကအရေးကြီးဆုံးပဲဖြစ်တယ်။အဲ့တော့ရှေ့နေငါးရင်ခွင့်ကိုညီမျိုးစုံနဲ့ဟန်တာခြင်းဒီဥပဒေနဲ့အညီခုခံခြေပပိုင်ခွင့်ကိုထိပါခြင်းပဲဖြစ်တယ်။နံပါတ်2အချက်အနေနဲ့တရားရုံးတွေဒီလွတ်လပ်ပြီးတော့အမိခိုကင်းတဲ့တရားရုံးတွေဖြစ်ဖို့လိုတယ်။လက်ရှိအုပ်ချုပ်ရေးအာဏာပိုင်တွေရဲ့လွှမ်းမိုးမှုအောက်မှာရှိနေတဲ့တရားရုံးတွေအရေးချင်းမပြည့်မီပဲနဲ့အဂတိတရားတွေနဲ့ပြေဝနေတဲ့တရားစီရင်ရေးစနစ်ကမျှတတဲ့တရားခွင်တစ်ခုဘယ်လို့မှမဖော်ဆောင်နိုင်ဘူး။နံပါတ်3အချက်အနေနဲ့အများပြည်သူရှေ့မှတရားစီရင်တဲ့တရားခွင်မျိုးဖြစ်ရမယ်။အကျဉ်းထောင်ထဲမှာဘသူ့ကိုမှဝင်ခွင့်မပေးပဲအလုံးပိတ်ကြားနာခြင်းဒီမျှတတဲ့တရားခွင်တစ်ခုမဟုတ်ဘူး။အဲ့တော့မမျှတတဲ့တရားခွင်ကနေချမှတ်လိုက်တဲ့အမိန့်တွေရတယ်တရားမဝင်ဘူး
အာဏာသိမ်းပြီးတဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းမှာတရားခံတွေကဥပဒေအရချိုးဖောက်ခြင်းခံနေရတယ်။ဖမ်းဆီးတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေမှာပိုပြီးသိတာထင်ရှားလာတယ်။ကျင့်ထုံးဥပဒေအရတရားခံတယောက်ကိုညှဉ်းပန်းနှိပ်စက်တာတွေရိုက်နှက်စစ်ဆေးတာတွေခွင့်မပြုထားပါဘူး။ ဒီနေ့ဖမ်းတယ်နောက်နေ့အလောင်းလာယူဆိုတာတွေကဥပဒေစကားအရပြောမယ်ဆိုရင်ဒါလူသက်မှုပဲဥပဒေသမားတယောက်အနေနဲ့ဘယ်လောက်ထိအခက်အခဲဖြစ်လဲဆိုရင်ဥပဒေအကြောင်းကိုပြည်သူတွေရှေ့မှာတော့မပြောပြနိုင်ရတဲ့အခြေအနေမျိုးရင်ဆိုင်နေရတယ်။ကုံပြောရမယ်ဆိုရင်အကူအညီပေးမဲ့ရှင်းတွေကိုတော့မှကျမတို့ကိုဘာအကြောင်းပြပြီးလာဖမ်းမလဲဆိုတာကိုကြောက်နေရတဲ့ဘဝကိုရောက်နေတယ်။ကျမတို့မှလည်းလွတ်လပ်မှုမရှိတော့ဘူး။
လက်ရှိစစ်အာဏာသိမ်းလိုက်တဲ့အခါမှာရိုင်နဲ့ချစားနေတဲ့တရားစီရင်ရေးအဆောက်အအုံကြီးတခါတည်းတွန်းပြိုလိုက်သလိုမျိုးစဆအရာရာပြိုလဲသွားတယ်
ဥပဒေဆိုရင်လူတွေကတရားမှယုံလဲမယုံကြည်ဘူးအားလည်းမကိုဘူးဥပဒေမရှိဘူးဆိုတဲ့ပုံစံမျိုးတောင်ထင်နေကြတယ်ဘလို့စိတ်နဲ့ဆက်လုပ်နေရလဲဆိုရင်တယောက်ကူနိုင်သည်ဖြစ်စေနှစ်ယောက်ကူနိုင်သည်ဖြစ်စေဥပဒေဆိုတာမျှတမှုရနိုင်သေးတယ်ဆိုရင်မျှော်လင့်ချက်လေးတစ်ခုကိုပဲပေးချင်တယ်ပါ
Well, that will give you a pretty good idea about just how much the legal environment in Myanmar has deteriorated even from the somewhat flawed system that was there beforehand. It's very sobering. Sam, I'll let you talk a little bit about the importance of this report now.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thanks everyone for coming here. I'm Sam Zarifi. I'm the Secretary General of the International Commission of Jurists. As Jonathan said, a long time analyst of human rights in Asia. I just want to start by saying it is very good to be back in the FCCT. I now work across the world, and the FCCT and this space in Bangkok remains a unique place for the discussion of issues around human rights and politics around the world, and I'm very pleased that it continues to perform that role. I'm here today to actually discuss a report that was not produced by the International Commission of Jurists. We continue to work in Myanmar as we have done for decades, but this report was produced by lawyers, members of the legal community whom we know, whom we trust, but who, for very obvious reasons, have had to work anonymously. So I'm very pleased and proud to highlight their report, but I don't want to claim the credit for the work that they have done. I think there are copies of the report for you all to see. I think it's also available online. I'll make sure about that. The report is called A State of Collapse, and as you just saw in that video, the situation regarding the rule of law in Myanmar has deteriorated massively, completely almost, since the coup in February 1st. I think it's fair to say that Myanmar is no longer a country that is ruled by law. It is simply ruled by force, and that is an important point. I think Jonathan mentioned that that journalists, diplomats at times look at the situation in Myanmar and just simply dismiss the judicial system. They just say, of course, it's a farce, it's a joke, it doesn't work. But the monopoly over the violence, the monopoly over the right to arrest people, to detain people, is a hallmark of a sovereign government. And the military in Myanmar has squandered this marker of sovereignty. And what we have seen is that the basic rights that are granted to everyone under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right to due process, the right to a fair trial, the right not to be arrested and detained arbitrarily, are now being completely ignored in Myanmar. Nevertheless, another important aspect of this report and what it documents is that there are lawyers, people within the legal system who continue to demand the rights of people in Myanmar who continue to fight for it. And those people are worthy and demanding of support and respect by the international community. And I think that's an important point to emphasize. I think for the military, it would be a victory for them to cut off the nascent, the brave group of lawyers and paralegals working in Myanmar from international support and from the international community. And from the ICJ's point of view, from our own work, and certainly from the work that our friends and colleagues have done in putting this report together, the point that we're trying to make is that these people, especially these lawyers, should be supported. I just want to begin by emphasizing that the right to a fair trial is an internationally recognized human right. It's not just something that governments can decide to provide or not to provide. Every time a government arrests or detains someone arbitrarily, it's a violation of rights. And there are international standards about what an independent judiciary and legal system should look like. I think what we will be able to say very clearly at this point is that the military regime in Myanmar has absolutely trampled on these standards across the board. But let me, if I can, get a little bit into some of these details. The junta, when it came into power, began immediately rewriting the legal system. And an important point, one that was made in the video and that we've also heard, is that the military has weaponized the law like many other authoritarian regimes around the world. It has tried to give a veneer of credibility to what it's doing. So there are still processes that are called trials in Myanmar. But these processes are quite far from anything that would be recognized as a fair trial in any other place. And importantly, very far from what has even been accepted in Myanmar and the experience of people, especially over the last 10 years. Let's start with the judiciary itself. One of the first things that the military did was to fire and get rid of justices of the Supreme Court that it viewed as politically problematic. And of course, this is a huge problem. The judiciary in Myanmar was always weak. Over the last 40 years, the military did everything it could to weaken the judiciary. The ICJ and I myself worked very closely with members of the judiciary over the last 10 years, and through multiple meetings, they always told us, they always complained, they always confessed and admitted that they were under significant pressure by the military. Well, after February 1st, in 2021, this pressure became absolutely insurmountable. And at this point, the judges are effectively operating, in many cases, as bureaucrats who are told how they have to order in particular cases. The system has been significantly perverted. As you have heard, there are now special courts that are set up inside prisons to address prisoners facing political charges. Within these special courts, there is no pretense of a fair trial whatsoever. There is no ability to question witnesses. There is no ability to challenge the government. Military authorities simply assert what they believe to be the case against the victims, the defendants, and almost always those verdicts are predetermined by the military, and the judges, acting, like I said, as administrators, not as judges, simply will affirm those. And as this report has really carefully monitored, this is something that over the last 10 years we had seen a move away from, and it is of course a huge disappointment that the military has been able to completely take over the judiciary. I think at this point it's fair to say that the judiciary, as I said, always weak, absolutely does not operate as an independent institution of any sort in Myanmar. Nevertheless, What is remarkable to me, what is very poignantly pointed out in this report, is that there are lawyers and there are members of the legal community who continue to show up at these trials, these, what would you call them, kangaroo courts, these farce institutions, and will try to do the best that they can for the people who are facing charges. And this has been an astonishing thing for us to see, the courage of this group of people. In many cases, they themselves face significant repercussions from the work that they've done. We've seen scores of lawyers being themselves detained for representing political prisoners. But we've also seen, and we've talked to numerous lawyers who have been intimidated, who've been warned about representing their clients. And of course, that in itself is a violation of rights and of the notion of the independence of the legal profession. This is not just limited to the political cases. The collapse of the legal system has gone down to the vast majority of cases which affect normal people, property disputes, domestic cases, criminal complaints at the village and township level. Again, this was always a weak system within Myanmar, but we had seen improvements over the last decade, and those improvements have now been absolutely rolled back and eroded. And I think that's an important point. We're not just talking about a system that is targeting politically active people. The erosion of trust in the legal system, the weakness of the legal system has really very quickly trickled down to the village level, so that the already low level of trust that people had for the judiciary has almost entirely disappeared. The problem of corruption, which was always endemic in the legal system, and about which I think we could say there had been maybe some improvements, has again returned in full force. So people simply have to pay for access to their documents, for any kind of even access to a court. And this is a tremendous setback for a country that had received a tremendous amount of international support and, of course, support from the region. I encourage you all to look at some of the details that are in this report, in particular regarding some of the politically sensitive cases, the establishment of special courts, which are in no way legitimate, and most problematically, the establishment of military tribunals to handle cases regarding civilians, and of course, the reimposition of the death penalty in Myanmar, which is in and of itself a significant step back for Myanmar and for the region after decades in which the death penalty had been effectively not applied in Myanmar. Nevertheless, as I said, our colleagues, our friends, lawyers across Myanmar are appearing at these tribunals. Sometimes their value is not really as lawyers, because, of course, the outcome is predetermined. They show up simply to give messages and pass messages between detainees and their families, sometimes to raise basic issues, the need for medical attention, the need for improvements in the places of detention. And these lawyers have become literally a lifeline between the detainees and the outside world. And this brings me to an important question that, of course, faces the international community and ASEAN, which is, how should they engage with the military? And was it worth it? 10 years of significant international attention, 10 years of significant investment and support, aid, humanitarian aid, development aid in Myanmar, and was it worth it? Was it all for nothing? I think for many of us who had worked with the NLD and with Daw Suu years ago, I think there was a grave sense of disappointment when her government and she herself ended up on the wrong side of the discussion around the the alleged genocide and the crimes against humanity perpetrated against the Rohingya. And there was a sense that maybe this whole effort had been a failure. But looking at the situation now, looking at the new generation of lawyers and paralegals who are continuing to fight, I think my response is, for the past 10 years, to the international community, that it was worth it, that there are now a new generation, as I said, who are aware of their rights and who are willing to demand their rights and fight for their rights despite significant efforts and intimidation and harassment and persecution by the military. And it's important for this group of people to continue to be supported. So, at the end, what is it that, where does this leave us in Myanmar? Of course, what we ask is that the military, of course, what we really want is for the military to step aside. And to return the civilian government. Let's be clear, that's really the only way forward. But as an immediate issue, what can be and should be and must be demanded of the military is that they return some of the basic legal protections, the right to habeas corpus, to end military tribunals and the death penalty immediately, and in particular, is to end the newly imposed restrictions on bar councils. The activity of the Bar Association in Myanmar has been absolutely taken over by the military. The bar is not allowed to select its own leadership or to impose its own rules. And what this means is that one of the key methods of persecution and harassment by the military is to withdraw the licenses of lawyers and paralegals. And this is a very effective means of shutting down any legal challenges. And of course, we want to see the military to start giving the judiciary some more room. These are things that can be and should be demanded of the military right now, even by the low standards of authoritarian governments, even by the standards of ASEAN countries, some of whom have become very, very adept at weaponizing the law against political opponents. What is happening in Myanmar is absolutely egregious and unprecedented. And in the context of a descent from the situation over the years ago, I think it's something that we expect ASEAN to challenge and to demand. From the international community, of course, we want to see some of the same things. I think it's really important for those who are providing or engaged in assistance and development aid to Myanmar to be able to support the activity of these lawyers and paralegals. There are thousands of them working in townships and villages across the country. There are challenges, I know, but those challenges can be gotten around. But it is crucial to maintain this core of people who are working to maintain some demand for human rights and the rule of law in the country. I think there are lawyers' networks around the country that can and should be supported, and we ask the international community to maintain its support, maybe even expand it. At the same time, to recognize that in areas under the military's control, it's at this point not really at all sensible to talk about the rule of law or the judiciary. And I think that's very important, of course, for any business from any country, not just Western countries, but for the investors in Myanmar, China, India, ASEAN, to really wonder, do they have any legal protection whatsoever? And the answer is no, and I think that's an important consideration for them. But also in areas that are not controlled by the military, we really want to see support for nascent, developing judicial structures. And this is something that also goes for the opposition in Myanmar. We are very pleased to see the NUG committing itself to legal reform. I think there are some lessons learned from how the NLD, frankly, approached this issue. I think it's important to see a commitment from the NUG regarding independence of the judiciary, to sign on to international standards, to commit to accountability. We're pleased to see them responding positively to the case before the International Court of Justice. We would like to see the NUG commit itself to signing the Rome Statute, but also, very importantly, to supporting the development of lawyers and judges in the areas under its control and influence. The situation in Myanmar today is very, very grim, but it is not hopeless. And the courage and activity of people who have continued to challenge military rule, I think, is something that is remarkable. I'm very pleased that this report has been able to document this. I think it's very important reading for decision makers in this region and around the world. And I think it's a credit to our friends, the lawyers, the legal community in Myanmar who've been able to continue their work. So thank you to the authors of this report. And I hope that we will be able to use international support and regional support to build on this very fragile structure of resistance. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Sam. Kin Omar, if we could come over to you, and perhaps, it's been now just over a year and a half since the coup. A lot of the media attention has been on the areas where there is open conflict between the military and PDF's People's Defence Forces, where some of the worst violence is. But I know the situation is very complex in Myanmar and variable around different parts of the country. Perhaps you could give us a sense of what the human rights situation is right now.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan, for the introduction. I'd also like to thank the International Commission of Jurists for launching this very important report, and also having me to speak on the panel of such an important topic as well. Before I get into the current situation, I just also want to start saying that it'll be an understatement to say that the rule of law in Myanmar remain flawed, because for decades under the previous successive military regimes, the rule of law in Myanmar has always been in deep crisis, as the country was ruled by the military force since 1962. So now, with everything happening in the country, there's so much also for us to reflect and learn lessons of the past 10 years of the reform work in Myanmar, including the judicial and law reform. Because, during that transition, we didn't really some couldn't really deep dive into the root causes of the country. So while acknowledging the past 10 years, giving the chance for the young generation to be empowered, and as we see in how strong the current resistance of the people in the country, especially from the young generation. But I think also that 10 years, there were so much of the opportunities that rose, but were actually shattered or that we lost along the way. So after all, everything that were built is now we're coming back to even below than the square one. So following the attempted coup last year, and I will keep using the word attempted coup, which will be quite different from the international actors, because in our eyes, this military is still trying to seize control of the country, and yet they are still unable to do it. They are still not successful to take over the country. In fact, that we see them, their coup attempt after 19 months have come to fail. So I will keep using the word the attempted coup. So please bear with me. Yeah, I think it's important to get the ground realities as a narrative than relying on to the traditional international narratives or the terms that we used. So this military junta, since last year, has shattered the country's justice system and severely damaged whatever was left of the rule of law. And that the state of justice today is, as Sam already outlined, is in a total collapse, because of the junta's reprehensible actions have already left every fabric of the decades-old, deeply already flawed and corrupt system in pieces. The juntas carrying out the non-stop manhunts and arrest of activists, members of civil society, civil disobedience movement, including the judges and lawyers, journalists, and the regular supporters of the democracy movement. So it happens it is ongoing from last year to now for the 19 months. And And you see that so far they arrested more than 15,000. Right now, more than 12,000 remain in detention. They killed more than 2,200, according to Assistant Association to Political Prisoners documentation. But that numbers, both the numbers of those who were arrested and detained, and those who been killed, actually the actual number is much higher, I believe, because there are so many areas that the media or the human rights documentation, civil society organizations are not able to reach or have access. So that's the problem that we have. And also during the detention, many the political prisoners suffer torture and inhumane treatment, and many are even tortured severely to death. And the torture also includes sexual violence and sexual harassment to those who are the women and LGBTIQ activists. The political prisoners are detained incommunicado, delayed medical care with irregular or no access to legal counsel or access for to families. The fate of many thousands hang on sham, often secret trials throughout the country, including the makeshift civilian courts or the military courts. What we see at the same time is these perpetrators of these crimes have cashed a carte blanche for impunity. So these figures that I just presented to you don't represent merely a justice system and the rule of law in shambles, but the hunters, the military hunters, unrelenting weaponization of the law and justice institutions to launch direct attacks against the people who have courageously and resolutely, in defiance against them and demanding a genuine federal democracy, and also for the end of this decades-long military impunity. One glaring example of the collapse of justice system is, of course, as Sam also mentioned, Jonathan also mentioned, is the malicious detention and trials of the state councillor Daw Aung San Suu Kyi on a string of groundless charges. As of September 2022, she's been charged with 16 separate criminal cases, including election frauds, illegal use of walkie-talkies, corruption. So today, she's been sentenced to a total of 20 years in prison with some time on hard labor. With 8 lawsuits pending in court, we can anticipate the sentences are most certainly going to compile. It's also deeply alarming that the junta has increasingly resorted to death penalty, and in-prison summary execution has become their latest tool in their terror campaign to suppress the people's resistance and opposition to them. The Assistant Association for Political Prisoners recorded 84 people have been sentenced to death. They are on a death row. And this excludes the recent summary execution of 4 democracy activists, including well-known figures called Jimmy and Pio Zayat. And that particular case represents another of the hunters' inhumane acts and proof of the hunters' weaponization of law and justice system to their political gain. Not only these executions were based on charade military trial, but they also amount to the crimes against humanity. At the same time, the hunters' weaponization of law further serves to normalize the coup attempt and acts as a leverage for the junta to gain their legitimacy from the international community. New and existing repressive laws, together with corrupt justice institutions, have only been few of the many fabricated actions to appear in control of the country and its population. This projected but failing facade remains the last hope of the hunters' effort to gain legitimacy from the international community. Anyone who monitors the ground realities in Myanmar knows very well that the junta does not have the control over the country. In spite of their terror campaign across the country, their attempts to assert authority and legitimacy have failed because people continue to categorically rejected them courageously with their resistance, both armed resistance as well as the political resistance and protest. Local administrations been formed by the resistance forces. Services including health and education are also being delivered through people-to-people solidarity approach. The Myanmar's government, not the opposition, the Myanmar's government, the legitimate government, national unity government, and ethnic revolutionary organizations are advancing their control over the country's territory. The NUG, Ethnic States Consultative Councils, as well as the local community-based and civil society organizations in networks with like-minded donors and diasporas have been providing services and humanitarian aid to the people. They're doing this effectively under the very overwhelming challenges and unprecedented circumstances. In this regard, whatever grip the junta may have over the country's territory, they are apparently losing rapidly. They're losing control of areas in both armed and also popular resistance areas. Meanwhile, the relentless onslaught of bloodshed operations and collective punishments in different forms against the civilians have, of course, already, as you all are well aware, have already proven the junta's complete disregard for humans' life. The evidence has been quite overwhelming. Therefore, it is very, very disheartening. Let me bring you to another concern that the local people, Myanmar people are having at this point is we are very disheartened to see that the UN agencies, namely the UNICEF, UN FAO, and UN OCHA, UN OCHA, continue to present credentials and partner with or sign MOUs with this illegitimate, illegal, murderous military junta. IOM is the latest to join that club. These recent moves of these UN agencies have been undercutting and undermining the sacrifices and efforts of our people. It is such a disgrace. These attempts have all been devised by the junta to falsely propagate an image of control over the country. Through these agencies' actions, the UN conveyed to the world that it will still recognize the body that is a terrorist organization under Myanmar's national law, as well as by the international definition, that the body that is responsible for gross international crimes. In turn, the junta is emboldened to continue waging its terror campaign with blanket impunity. Partnering with the junta, in particular for humanitarian assistance, has been not only ineffectual, as has also consistently failed to reach people in need, but it also allows the junta to weaponize the aid even more tools to advance its political gains. Through this recognition, the junta is emboldened to continue its grave human rights violations and crimes, knowingly that they know that they can continue to enjoy this blanket impunity. So these agencies have not only given the legitimacy to the junta, they are really severely undermining the work of our civil society organizations and people. And they themselves, actually, they are in fact violating the very principles of do no harm and impartiality that they should be in compliance with. So it's really morally very wrong at the same time. These actions are especially worrying as they are taking place in time right now when the decision on Myanmar's representative at the United Nations General Assembly is fast approaching. With the planned elections in August 2023, as Myanmar Lai, the chief of the military junta claimed, they are actually hoping to portray an image of normalcy in Myanmar to hold this election, you see, and they are bidding for the legitimacy from the international community. But see, as we've seen today, the law has been continuously weaponized by the junta, but not only the law, they are also weaponizing the humanitarian assistance and also the UN agencies' credentials and MOUs. We must not allow another cycle of military rule in Myanmar that is reinforced by these UN agencies and international actors that happened in past 3 decades. The 5-year commemoration of the Rohingya genocide on 25th August has reminded us once again that justice and accountability remain elusive for these grave international crimes committed by the same military that continues to perpetrate war crimes and crimes against humanity throughout the whole country. Today, the ongoing area bombings, shelling, and burning of villages, and killing and torturing of civilians, particularly in Upper Myanmar and in many of the ethnic frontier regions, mirror the exact image of the past. So does the absolute impunity the military enjoy. So here, in conclusion, I'd like to read out a passage from the report launched today that aptly represents the reimagination of the future of Myanmar's justice system. Future reform Future reform efforts must move beyond those of the past and reimagine the justice system anew. The influence and authority of the military must be fully and unequivocally removed from matters of the administration of justice and new, more inclusive institutions and policies should be informed by the experience of the diverse legal community, including those from ethnic and religious minorities. I cannot agree more, but I also like to argue that this military institution must be dismantled once and for all as a whole. The Myanmar military is nothing but a terrorist organization, and they need to be treated as one. As long as this military remains as it is now, the perpetrators are not held accountable by law, the impunity will continue and Myanmar will not have a chance to move forward. And the justice and any other institutions and policy can never be reformed anew to reflect diversity and protect equality for all in Myanmar. People of Myanmar will never have a chance to seek justice. So with that, what we need to see is we need to really support the current people's revolution. This revolution must win for Myanmar to move forward. And international community really needs to stand with the people of Myanmar. And it is most crucial the international justice and accountability mechanisms are expedited. We need the government extend all possible support to the Gambia case against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice, as well as the case filed in Argentina under universal jurisdiction. And we also need the UN Security Council to act, and we need the governments to step up and refer Myanmar's situation to the International Criminal Court or establish an ad hoc tribunal. Meanwhile, the ongoing heinous crimes must be halted at once. So we want the US, UK, and the EU and many other countries to place further targeted sanctions on the junta and also their military-linked businesses. And urgently, we need the international community to use all tools at their disposal to press for arms embargo and impose sanctions on those companies who are brokering arms for this terrorist military junta. With that, thank you so much for your attention. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Kinoma. Lots of food for thought there. I'd like to bring in Wei Wei Nu, and I'm sure that you'll agree with a lot of what Kinoma has said, but I think you might be able to give us a little bit more detail about the experiences of the justice and legal system inside Myanmar.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to all those who made these panel discussions and this report happen. Indeed, the report covers the detrimental effect of the attempted coup on justice systems as well as lawyers and paralegals across Myanmar. These civilians are risking everything simply to do their job, protecting rule of law and beyond, representing the pro-democracy movement. But today I would like to emphasize a few points. First, I would like to underscore the fact that the Myanmar's judiciary has never been truly independent. Over the past 3 decades or more, the military manipulated the judicial systems to legitimize its illegal authority and brutal control. Before the so-called political transition, the military and its related bodies actually pursued many of these tactics that we are witnessing today in Myanmar. Among them, the militaries appointed judicial officers, judges, prosecutors, and officially used the phrase like, according with the law, to justify their actions. And they continue using this phrase today. And even during this supposedly democratic transition, although the NLD government attempted to reform the justice sectors by appointing civilian judges, the judiciary was still deprived of independence, impartiality, and competency. The military remained in charge of appointing many of the higher-ranking judges, leaving it forces to continue to commit mass atrocity against ethnic minorities, including the attack of genocide against Rohingya in 2017. That is why it is essential for us to rely on the international justice processes and advocate for them and the international community to bring justice to victims and survivors across Myanmar. Second, I would like to emphasize that the military has long used the justice systems, including its laws, courts, and trial to target ethnic minorities and other civilians, including human rights defenders and legal practitioners. The military has traditionally weaponized the laws and court to target protesters over the several decades, including crackdown against the protesters in 1974, 1988, and 2007 uprisings. In the case of Rohingya, the usage of laws and criminal justice system has been pivotal tool to weaken the community for decades by criminalizations of the public servants, through mass arrests and targeting the educated and young one in the early stage of genocide since 1990s, and continue to target the community through restrictions of movement, marriage, birth, and so many other ways until today. And this whole area has been overlooked and under-discussed by the scholars and international communities. Third, since the attempted coup, the military has intensified these decades-long tactics of weaponizing the country's justice sectors through imposing martial laws, amending the penal code and criminal procedures, as it has done time and time again. The military is clearly doing this to justify their brutality against all people across Myanmar. By enacting martial laws, the military attempted to justify its invasive searches, arbitrary arrest and detention, murder against peaceful protesters and other innocent civilian. The usage of the military courts and closed trial has become very common. This time the tactics, the weaponizations of laws to brutalize the civilian has been extreme, and we have never seen these massive scales, and we have to acknowledge that. And this, for me, this only happened because this whole area of using the justice systems for their benefit, for their advantage to brutalize the country has been overlooked for decades. And basically, that now that they're not just, it's not just the civilian protesters, but also, as was discussed in the report, they have been increasingly targeting lawyers and paralegals and their family members. And especially women's lawyers are facing extra or different forms of targets, threats, and intimidations every day. And the report today remind us once again reminded us how many lawyers continue to use their knowledge and skills and risk their life to represent pro-democracy movement and human rights defenders. But as was highlighted by previous speakers, we still don't have the exact number of arrests and detainees. And we can also, there are actually a lot of the areas that cannot be covered or reached by the NGOs and lawyers. And there are massive gap for legal aid and protection, legal representations for the detainees, and that is another point that we also have to acknowledge and try find ways to fill the gap while providing support to the lawyers and paralegals who are assisting these detainees. So I think these are some of the gaps that I'm seeing at this point. Missing areas of legal support, and then support for the existence, the current lawyers who are doing their job, and there hasn't been enough of it, and there are only. If there's no support for the lawyers and paralegals, they can only do their job for not so long, basically. So basically, what I think it's needed to be done immediately is find ways to support more lawyers, the lawyers, and then more lawyers to be able to support the detainees and provide legal representations and increase access to justice, and also providing support for the organizations in the minorities areas and marginalized areas to be able to provide legal aid, and also finding ways to work on strengthening access to justice in Myanmar in general, and having a short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategy to really strengthening access to justice overall, and also as was discussed in the report, supporting maybe providing support to reimagine justice systems and developing independent, competent, and impartial and inclusive justice system through the NUG government or other local actors in ethnic minorities areas. I'll stop here and happy to take part in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Wei Wei. I'm going to turn over to Jackie now, and the work that the special rapporteur who Jackie's working with, Tom Andrews. Any of you who've been following Myanmar will know that Tom Andrews has been perhaps the most outspoken UN official constantly, and he's kept this up ever since the coup. Jackie, would be interested to hear, the findings from his work, and I suppose also a reflection of, does he ever lose heart? I mean, I've watched Tom passionately demanding action on Myanmar since the day of the coup, and we're 18 months on. It must be quite dispiriting for him to see how little has actually happened to help the situation there.
Thank you, Jonathan. Before responding to that and to speak a little bit about his general findings, I just wanted to thank the ICJ for inviting me to speak here today, and of course to Wei Wei and Kinomar for their very insightful presentations on the human rights situation in Myanmar, and of course to the authors of the report that's being released today. Maybe to start and to respond to your question outright, Jonathan, I think that, on the special rapporteur, what he's trying to do, as Kinomar and Wei have said, he's been calling almost religiously for accountability for past abuses, for ongoing abuses, increased sanctions against the junta, to stop the weapon flow, to stop the, money flow as well. And while, you could lament and say, oh, the international community has not acted enough, and of course, there is a lot that needs to be done, like huge amounts that needs to be done, and his calls for action haven't been met. What he's also trying to focus on, and I think this is alluded to in the report and it's also alluded to by the panelists here, is that there is an enormous amount of work being done inside the country. This report highlights the work of lawyers and paralegals who are trying their best and responding in kind of the most amazing, resilient ways to the crisis, try and help people as best they can. They sometimes need to adapt their ways of working, and are sometimes doing things that are very far outside what we would consider strictly legal work. Sometimes they're helping families locate arbitrarily arrested and forcibly disappeared members, and they're doing search. And but I think that to support that kind of work is also what's needed, that we can't just say that, nothing's being done. There is actually a lot being done, and what's missing is the international community rising to the level of what's being done at the local level. So today I just wanted to highlight some of his more general findings. I'm going to limit myself to things that he's already been saying in the public domain, and I know that I'm no Tom Andrews, and I'm sure that he would have loved to have been here, but I hope that I can sort of make some important comments about what he's been finding so far. So firstly, I think what's important to state is that the report released today, is very much in line with the findings of the Special Rapporteur and the findings that he has been consistently highlighting, namely how the illegal coup in Myanmar has been not only a violent and illegal usurpation of democratic power that has led to a litany of human rights abuses and even international crimes, but it has also decimated the rule of law across the country. So I'd like to focus on two key areas that the Special Rapporteur has focused on in connection with this theme of the impact of the coup and access to justice. So the first being the situation with regards to children, and then the weaponization of the law, including through the so-called amendments, including the application of the death penalty, which has also been touched on by others. So in June 2022, the Special Rapporteur released a conference room paper on the situation of children in Myanmar. It was entitled "Losing a Generation: How the Military Junta is Devastating Myanmar's Children and Undermining Myanmar's Future." The report found that the junta had been intentionally targeting children in attacks. It noted that at the time of publication, over 250,000 children had been displaced. But moreover, the report had found that at the time of the publication, and since the coup, the illegal coup, 1,400 children had been arbitrarily detained, and hundreds of children still remain in detention, where they may be subject to torture and grave threats to their health and safety, and there's uncertain prospects for their release. What we do know at that time is 39 children had been detained as political prisoners who were under the age of 10. So the main findings of that report were that the detention of children, their abuse while in the custody, violates their rights to liberty, to a fair trial, and to be free from torture, amongst other rights. The mass detention of children also possibly constitutes a crime against humanity of imprisonment or severe deprivation of physical liberty. The report also noted that the UN has documented the torture of 142 children since the coup. There's also credible reports that children, including girls, in detention were subject to sexual abuse as well as sexual harassment. The report also highlights the use of hostage taking as a method to try and capture other wanted persons. He had found that the junta had detained 61 children as hostages. Most children were arrested to exert pressure on parents to turn themselves into participating in protest activities. Those detained include many young children, some of them just toddlers. But in terms of the rule of law, many children that are detained were charged under this new section 505A of the Penal Code. And this section was the section added by the junta after the coup, which makes it a crime to cause fear to a group of citizens or spread false news. Children have also been charged under other penal code provisions, the counter-terrorism law, the Public Property Protection Act, as well as many others. And so due to the collapse of the court system, the collapse of rule of law, the problems in terms of accessing justice, getting access to lawyers, many children find themselves in indefinite, arbitrary pre-trial detention in crowded facilities with no access to healthcare, no access to their families. Another aspect which has been highlighted is that, and which has been touched on by many of the panelists, is the declaration of martial law, which allows cases to be tried in military courts. And these military courts, they're not accessible to the public, and they suspend some of the protections that were purportedly offered by the so-called child law, which, was not fully implemented in and of itself, even prior to the illegal coup, but at least, provided some protections on paper. So from the research to date, and what the report found was at least 4 children had been tried and sentenced in these military courts. Given the lack of information and transparency, and as many have alluded to, it's possible that these numbers are just the tip of the iceberg. The rapporteur has also documented that children deprived in civilian court are also deprived of fair trial. Courts have been moved inside prisons, preventing access to family members, the media, or the public. And I mean, as the report that's being released today has noted, defence lawyers report threats and harassment. Some defence lawyers have been arrested and detained. There are also reports of judges pressuring children to confess to crimes. So all this paints a picture of a very, very shocking situation for children who are at risk at any point of being arbitrarily detained, possibly subject to enforced disappearance because they're sent to detention centres or places of detention. They're not even detention centres, police stations, without the knowledge of their family, without no one knowing their whereabouts, and lack of access to any kind of meaningful justice process. But beyond the rule of law, that report also highlights, and I think it's important to touch on, the important and severe violations of economic and cultural rights across Myanmar. So I think that rule of law and the rights to justice can't be seen in a vacuum. What we have now is 7.8 million children out of school, not learning about their rights. They're a complete collapse of the public health system since the coup, and the World Health Organization projecting that potentially up to 33,000 children could die preventable deaths just in this year alone due to lack of routine immunizations. So it's a collapse of so many basic services, and children are bearing the brunt of this. The second point that I wanted to touch on is executions and the death penalty. So since the military coup of 1st of February, military tribunals have sentenced over 100 individuals to death, including 41 in absentia. This is in contravention of international law. And what he's particularly concerned about, and what the mandate has highlighted over and over, is that this is instrumentalization of the legal system, so passing laws to further erode the rule of law. So the junta have issued a series of legal orders to impose the application of death penalty for basically any protest activity. So the martial law order, which was promulgated by them in March 2021, provides for the application of the death penalty for 23 very vague and broadly defined offences. Most notably, the law provides that the death penalty can be applied for treason, which in practice means any criticism of the military. The Special Rapporteur emphasises that this should be seen as the use of capital punishment by the junta as a tool to instill fear, as well as stifle dissent and opposition. And as we're all aware, the 4 political prisoners who were executed a few months ago were tried and convicted in military tribunals, lacked legal counsel, and in clear violation of international human rights law. There are, of course, many more issues to touch on, but I think in the interest of time and leaving some space for discussion, I'll conclude there and hand back to you.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Apologies, the line was a little bit broken up at times there from Geneva. Look, we've heard from all 4 of our speakers. We have got a microphone over there, so any of you who've got questions you're chewing over, please feel free to go and use the mic to put a question to any one of the 4 speakers. If you do, please identify yourselves when you do that. I wanted just to take the opportunity now, sitting from the podium, to ask you, Sam, about this use of, or misuse, which is clearly happening in Myanmar, of the justice system, and how the diplomatic community deals with that. I mean, I know that in places like Thailand, embassy officials are more or less, they can go and observe trials, but they can do no more than that because they represent governments. They cannot, they can always be told this is a judicial affair, and this seems to be something that's being used time and again. The Myanmar government is obviously, for all of the enormous criticisms of what's going on, they can always say rule of law. They've been through a legal process. I mean, is there a way in which governments can get around this taboo that they're not allowed to be seen to be interfering in judicial affairs.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think actually the diplomatic community in Myanmar can do and should do quite a bit more. As you've mentioned, in places around the world, diplomats have showed up at various stages of the judicial process. Their presence simply sends a message, not just to the government, but also to the lawyers and to the activists that somebody is watching. And I think that's something that unfortunately has actually fallen a little bit by the wayside in Myanmar, and I think it's crucial to do that not just in Yangon, but across the country. I think for the military, ensuring the safety and protection of diplomats is a high priority, and I think diplomats should use that space and assert themselves. They should show up, even if the military doesn't allow them into tribunals. It's important to have that presence, to know that people are watching, and we have seen that that really can have a very important impact. Judges, even police officers, when they're aware that somebody is watching, will sometimes try to change their behavior. And I think that's an important tool for the international community to use, which they haven't used enough in Myanmar in the last 18 months.
I had something else that crossed my mind, which I wanted to put to both Kin Omar and Wei Wei Nu, which is what is the state of justice, if we can call it that, in the areas that are controlled. I'm not going to leave, not so much the ethnic armed organization areas, because they've been there a long time, but thinking about the large parts of Upper Myanmar, Sagaing and Magway, where People's Defense Forces now pretty much run what you might call liberated zones. What is the state of justice as you understand it there? How are the groups allied and loyal to the NUG able to operate a kind of justice system? If we know anything at all, I'm not sure how much we do know. Don't know whether Kin Omar, if that's funny, we can say first.
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. I can just share what I know. So I know that the NUG also has the Ministry of Justice, and they also been working together with both the EAOs in some of the areas that their PDFs are in, and also those upper areas that you mentioned. There are, like I said, the local administration's been formed, and there's been the NUG Justice Ministry has been working on those issues. There are many of these judges and lawyers who are the CDM, who joined the CDM movement. They've been also working closely with the NUG. I don't know the details, to be honest, but I just know that there are some of these local justice systems being established also along with their territory advancing and service provisions. But I don't know the details, but maybe we might know some.
Wei, did you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, actually not much. We've been recommending the NUG's Justice Ministry to set up alternative justice systems or NUG's justice systems, and I think they are working on it, and they have established not only local administration but also police systems in some areas. So these are some development. I think, like I said in my remark earlier, it is important to provide support to NUG to be able to develop a competent and reliable, as well as independent and impartial justice systems from the beginning, so that it will help us actually in reimagining or building a new justice systems in Myanmar in the future. I think the challenge right now is in, as you rightly said, in mostly Burmese majority divisions and area where, like in Sagaing and Magway, where they were heavily relying on the state formal justice systems in the past, but now it has been collapsed, and there are many cases of abuses and human rights violations, even by the local PDF and etc. has been occurring. So I think these areas need a greater attention. Whereas in ethnic arms area, there has always been some form of customary or traditional non-formal justice system put in place from the beginning through their tradition. So I think it is, before too late, it is important that there has been enough support and reminder and monitoring the situations on the ground in those areas where we are receiving increasing reports of human rights violations by the actors in those areas. At the same time, supporting NUGs and understanding where things are would be very valuable at this point.
I've not had a chance to look in detail at the report, but one thing that I wondered, I mean, any of you could fill in on this, is do we have examples yet or details of lawyers or judges who have been severely penalized for representing people opposing the military? I mean, there's lots of threats of it, and we've heard of the possibility of some being charged, but I've not heard details of any. I mean, do we know anything about that? Yep, Sam.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, actually, there's quite a few. I think we're looking at around 40 or so lawyers who have been directly persecuted simply for representing their clients at times, literally as they've left the representation, as they've left the courthouse. So,
what are they charged with?
They're charged with Section 501, I think, and so it's the classic point that is made to them, is that simply by representing those clients, they are subverting the rule of the government, which is, of course, completely in violation of international norms. And every time one of these lawyers is arrested or detained, what we see is that all the legal community around them steps back, of course, because they can't face it. And several instances, I think more than a couple of dozen, I think the report speaks to lawyers who have been forced to stop working because either judges or the police have simply told them that they should be careful and that if they continue to represent their clients, they will face persecution.
Yeah. Dominic. Sorry, wait, yeah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just like to add that there are a number of cases where the lawyer has also been charged with the counterterrorism laws, and that could lead up to the sentences of these lawyers to the higher years, and these are extremely concerning. And in some cases, like for example, in the case of a lawyer from Mandalay, Yuan Nu Aung, you know, the way that they have detained these lawyers hasn't been gentle, and it's as the way that they have been using against other protesters, and they are brutal, and humiliating in all the way long. And these lawyers actually simply doesn't have any protections as all of this, all the way through from the arrest to the trial. So yes, the key area here are like the way the military has been allowed, the police and security forces has been allowed to arrest in a way which is very brutalizing, as well as the fact that they do not, even the lawyers do not receive a fair trial. That is something that I think we must also recognize.
Thanks very much. Dominic here.
Yes, Dominic Fulda, Nikkei Asia. When I used to cover Burma in detail, there was a perception that every law that had ever been enacted in the country was still on the books, so that they could come out and whack you as hard as possible with whatever was around. So, for example, there was a drone incident and they used a 1935 law to come out, they just dragged it out. So you're not going to win against people like that. They're not reasonable. They're not people you can interact with. We've known this for ages. We've watched UN officials, rapporteurs go in and be humiliated. Madame Ogata was locked up at the Strand Hotel. Her rights were violated when she was supposed to be going in there. Where is this going? Kinoma, you talk about the UN agencies misbehaving and sort of getting accreditation with the junta. They would say we're going in to render humanitarian assistance. So if you're condemning them, what do you suggest they should actually be doing? How should they behave?
Kinoma?
Thank you for, yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. So we have been really addressing this issue, trying to communicate in different means and ways with suggestions and proposals based on the fact that these agencies don't have access, cannot have access, and even if they are given limited access, that is under watch and control by the junta. And that is not new, that's been previously the same too. So that also, that's why we're saying that there is this aspect of the human security when it comes to the humanitarian that needs to be considered hands in hand. So what we've been proposing to these agencies and the international donors and actors is that these first, Myanmar, local civil society and local responders, there is a very strong local agency, resilience, as well as the capacity, and most importantly, the trust from the people who are in the dire need of such help. And these local responders have been doing this work forever, because as you know well, since also you cover Myanmar, Burma for a long time, this military attacks is not new, really, especially for the ethnic communities. So since last year, together with those local responders from the ethnic communities who've been doing such work for past decades, have the capacity, experience, and also the system in place that donors require. Together with those new responders who emerged from this Spring Revolution in response to this military's latest attacks across the country, they've been working together and they've been able to do the works in spite of the challenges. So there are what these agencies need to do is put the trust in these local humanitarian actors, put the trust in the local Myanmar civil society and community-based organizations who know how to do, who are trusted by the people, who do things effectively and efficient. And I think that is where we are having a problem. We don't see these UN agencies giving the trust to the very people who are, in fact, who are at the front line to save the people's lives. They are not given trust by these UN agencies, and yet these UN agencies will go and shake hands with the junta and extend these MOUs. So our proposal is work with these local responders, local humanitarian organizations, Myanmar civil society, and community-based groups, and don't go through the junta. There are many ways that they can actually process it going through from outside the country. And that is also, again, that is not new. That has been done forever before too. So we're not inventing a new way. We are actually asking them to support what is already there on the ground. But like I said, unfortunately, I don't understand the logic. Why they will be able to extend these MOUs and shake hands with this junta, knowingly that they will not have a chance to do what they claim to do, and while they are not putting trust in the people on the ground who are saving their life. So yeah, I mean, we have the solution, and that's what we've been doing, and we just need them to put the trust in our people, and yet that's not what we're seeing.
Next question, please.
Thank you. My name is Lakdeep Babra. I'm retired from the World Bank, currently living here in Bangkok. I used to work in Myanmar A couple of questions, if I can, Jonathan. Cut me off if you need to.
Okay.
Number one, is this report available in local language, in Burmese, in the Myanmar language? That's one, because perhaps some of us here could help distribute that in other forms. Number two, I didn't quite fully catch the discussion or response on alternative, I think the word used was courts or justice, but is there any effort or possibility of a parallel trial process? In other words, if you have a high-profile defendant who is in court in Myanmar, why not conduct a parallel trial in a third location to give an alternative narrative? So that's a question or a comment. Should I stop?
I think your first question will get a pretty easy one. I mean, it's not, is it available in Burmese or not yet?
It's being translated right now,
Okay,
so it will be available.
Yeah. Your second is, it's an interesting idea. I'm trying to work out quite what the point would be. I mean, as I understand it, a lot of the trials are pretty farcical, and people are essentially being tried for expressing their rights. So I can't imagine many people thinking it worth holding a parallel trial of someone. So I mean, for more serious, and again, we can go over to our two Burmese panelists. I mean, one thing I know from work I've done is there is now, quite extraordinarily, a parallel health system. And it's because most of the health workers are loyal to the NUG and have abandoned their work in the state hospitals, and they're having to set up effectively an underground health system. And probably a very significant portion of the population are now getting their health care from a guerrilla, or almost literally an underground health system. I mean, I think I did, Weiwei and Kinom, I did kind of mention the some details, the attempts to have some sort of judicial process in PDF or NUG-controlled areas. I'm not quite sure how far that is. I mean, what exactly were you suggesting?
Well, I mean, what the thought I have is that in the same way that in conflict zones one has governments in exile, my idea off the top of my head is, why not potentially for high-profile cases run a trial under an international structure where you come up with an alternative ruling, shall we say. So you create an alternative narrative. Anyway, it's not really a question, and I'm not a lawyer.
You think the obvious example would be Suu Kyi, would you? But I mean,
whoever.
But the things she's charged with are sort of
it leads me to another question, which is, who is the current highest profile non-Burmese prisoner in Myanmar, and is that something to leverage? That's another question.
That would be Sean Turnell and now Vicky Bowman, of course, two of the most prominent foreigners who've been detained, or the most prominent. But I guess their situation is much the same as everyone else's. They sort of don't know much about them.
Just specifically regarding Vicky and Sean, I guess for better or for worse, they face all of the same injustices as everybody else. So they are, as far as we know, they're not receiving better treatment. We are in touch with them. But just to build a little bit on this idea, I mean, of course, an alternative trial, I'm not sure I fully understand it, but to me, a couple of points, and this also goes back a little bit to Dominic's question. The whole point of the justice system, and I think an important point in this report, is actually to fight this cynicism, Dominic, is this to fight the notion that, say, justice has never been possible, it will never be possible, and therefore let's just give up. And I think certainly something that we saw over the last 10 years manifested acutely after the coup is that these young lawyers, especially these young lawyers, are willing to fight. I have to say that in some cases against our advice, against my own advice to them, they are willing to stay. They are right there in front of insane prison, and they're willing to ask these questions. And I think an important lesson learned there for the international community, but very crucially for the opposition forces, for the armed opposition groups, for the NUG, is that I think unlike the NLD, which came into power and very early on signaled that they actually didn't really particularly care about an independent judiciary, I think it's important to signal a commitment to an independent judiciary and to say that in the areas under their control, they will set up processes as rudimentary as they are. And I think something that is referred to in this report in terms of alternative justice mechanisms in areas under opposition control, policy-making bodies, that's something we would really like to see. And I think we have to believe that the military will not maintain this level of control, and that there will be a change at some point in the future. And I think what we've learned is to make that change sustainable, you have to have this infrastructure of the rule of law. It really is not something that we can simply cast aside. And I think I'm certainly impressed by the ability of these lawyers and legal workers to continue working.
Kingsley.
Hi, Kingsley Abbott with the ICJ. I didn't want to end the event without asking this question, because we're here in Thailand, really for Wewe Nu and Kino Ma. How do you assess the response in the region, ASEAN's response and Thailand's response to what's happened in Myanmar since the coup? Do you sense that there's been some change in sentiment, and what do you think needs to be done by the region and by Thailand?
Wewe, do you want to go first? You're on mute.
No, Antioma, go ahead first.
Okay.
I think it's obviously the ASEAN responses on Myanmar is inefficient and inadequate, and basically it's not working in one term. The Thailand, we know they are somehow receiving the refugees and helping the refugees a little bit, letting the refugees, a lot of the Burmese refugees to stay. But there are so many restrictions and challenges they face. But in the political level, they have been very, very unsupportive of democracy movement. Instead, it seems like they are being more aligned with the military leaders. So it's been very, very concerning for us. And I hope that they change their strategy and continue to disengage with the military and hold the military's leaders accountable for their failure to comply with the 5-point consensus, and basically a response in a way it is effective and change the military's behavior on the ground, and support the other international pressures and accountability processes in the UN. Do not, if you cannot be effective and helpful, just don't block the processes for the accountability, justice, as well as the pressure on the military. I am not seeing over the past, since the 5-point consensus has introduced, I'm not seeing any changes or any development over the past 1 year, besides letting the junta's representative join in some of the meetings. So these are they're not being helpful.
Thanks. Kinoma?
Yeah, just to follow on what we said, I think at this point, the ASEAN really needs to make a decisive decision in this upcoming summit in November, which is quite fast approaching at this point. I mean, yes, the 5 points consensus has been a failure, and that's a fact. So we don't even need to really elaborate. It can be seen from their own action of what is there, even to claim for a little progress. For the Myanmar people, there is nothing really. In fact, we see that as irrelevant in the current context. These 5 points are no longer relevant, whereas also it is a time delay tactic that the military can continue to prolong, using these 5 points. And I think the challenge that we're having is both the UN and international governments are relying on these 5 points, knowingly seeing that there's nothing there to really move forward. So Yes, but saying that, there are some individual actors that we need to acknowledge their leadership, such as the Malaysian Foreign Minister, Dato Saifuddin. He sees the ground, he sees what's happening, he knows it, and he is really taking the leadership to work with his counterparts. And that's something we want to see more of. Foreign Minister from Malaysia, from other ASEAN countries. Now, that Indonesia is going to be the chair of ASEAN next year. So in next few months, the Indonesia has taken the flag. So we need the Indonesian government to also, really be concrete. Right now, what we understand, I was one of those civil society actors, had a dialogue with the foreign minister from Malaysia. It's been very clear that there is a, this outline, that he has how to address the Myanmar crisis. I think what we need, the ASEAN actually took the unprecedented decisions, right? So, for example, they're not allowing Myanmar to attend the summits. That's great, and they're not allowing the junta's foreign minister to the meetings, the ministerial meeting. That's also good. But then, like we said, there are other meetings the junta's representatives are still attending. So people ask me, well, in that case, what about suspending Myanmar from the ASEAN? So my answer will be, it is not the answer. That's how I will respond. Because the actual answer for the ASEAN is, as long as Myanmar is there, regardless of they are official member of the ASEAN or not, Myanmar is ASEAN, a part of the ASEAN anyway. So as long as Myanmar crisis is not resolved, the spillover effects, including the human security and other political and social economic situations, impacts will be actually coming cross-border to the neighboring countries, to the region. And I think that it is inevitable for the ASEAN leadership to address this with a concrete action. What we are calling for is actually stop all of these military juntas representatives attending all the meetings in ASEAN, including the ASEAN Human Rights Commission, Women and Children Rights Commission. Why even have these people from the junta to represent when the children are being killed and women are being raped? So that is a very clear thing that they need to actually do in the next 2 months. And the one thing is also they need to bring the Myanmar people's, if they want to actually support the Myanmar people's will and the interest of the Myanmar people, they need to bring the Myanmar people's legitimate government, NUG, to sit to represent the people of Myanmar in the ASEAN. I think working with the NUG and also with the ethnic revolutionary organizations together, that's the only way for ASEAN to really help resolve this crisis in Myanmar, which will be, of course, in turn will be the benefit for the ASEAN, also as a community building to move forward. If Myanmar doesn't move forward, ASEAN doesn't move forward, period. So I hope that they will make a right decision, concrete decision in the next 2 months.
Thanks very much. We've got one last question, I think.
Ross Clark, international lawyer. My question relates to the international accountability mechanisms. I think we would all agree that for the situation for lawyers, the rule of law, the country at large to change, we need to break the cycle of impunity. And I think some of the best hope we have now is through these international accountability mechanisms, and we have the unique situation where we have a number set up and operational while the violations are occurring. Often, it's decades later that these mechanisms are in place. So just your reflections, Sam and others, on how they're operating. How do you rate them so far? Clearly a lot of political challenges in the Security Council, but should we be hopeful to see progress through these mechanisms? Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. That's maybe another panel. I'm actually very curious to hear what Wei Nu and Kin Omar have to say. I think from a legal point of view, actually, as you pointed out, it is remarkable. We have the genocide case moving forward in the International Court of Justice. We've had a number of recent additions to that case. I think the United States, Germany also. The UK, I'm not sure if they've still moved ahead, but that is a very important case in terms of both international law and the way in a convention such as the Genocide Convention is handled. The military government in Myanmar seems to have effectively lost all control over how they're going to respond to that case, but it is moving forward, and it will certainly have an impact on them. I don't see how they're going to get out of that. Obviously, the case at the internet and the investigation at the International Criminal Court is quite important. That's moving forward, and most crucially, I think, is the independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar that is now gathering evidence. It seems to be operating reasonably well. Again, I'm very anxious to hear from Wei Nu and Kin Omar and other members of civil society from Myanmar, especially the Rohingya, in terms of how they're interacting. But this is, in many ways, the most robust response we've had to a massive human rights crisis by the international community. What will happen immediately? Well, we've seen also cases being brought in Argentina. I think there's a case in Australia. I think in Turkey. These are all important. I think at some point well, I don't want to use the phrase the noose will tighten, but I think the restrictions will start growing. I think we will start seeing sanctions, and most crucial, I think we will start seeing pressure on the military's finances, and that's certainly something that we as the ICJ think is important. Once we start seeing cases handing down decisions and handing down penalties, then the natural response is to go after the bank accounts, and I think that is very important. And again, to me, that signals that this military government must realize that they're essentially operating at a dead end. They simply cannot continue governing the country as they had in the past. I think the legal avenues for them are really blocked. I think they have lost any sense of legitimacy. They're struggling to even establish their sovereignty. So to me, this is a very strong response by the international community, and one that I'm hopeful for. Does that mean that we will immediately see the Rohingya return to their communities, to their homes, and get some compensation? Probably not. But short of military involvement, which is absolutely not on the table right now in Myanmar, I think this is a very important effort by the international community to respond to an egregious human rights crisis.
Kin Omar, how important is are these international judicial proceedings as far as you're concerned?
It's very important. I think, like the Myanmar's case, without the utilizing of the international law, without the international criminal law and the accountability mechanisms, I don't think there is a chance. I mean, it is a big part of the whole puzzle to address the Myanmar crisis. But with that, I still think that there a lot more can be done. It could have done a lot more. I mean, like the Rohingya genocide was already 5 years. My question is, like, did they have to wait that 5 years to get where we are now? I mean, you can probably say that I'm just being too, anxious. Well, the situation doesn't allow us to be relaxed. So it is longer than what it should have been. The international community, I would say that they were not as responsive as they could have been, and not. I think that's one thing. But of course, saying that, yes, like some said, some of the countries joining now at the ICJ is good. But then my question will be, why not also take up the universal jurisdiction, like in their own respective countries, like Argentina, for example. And there are many other measures that they can do, which I don't think they are really doing that yet. But that includes the other elements, like cutting the financial flow to the military junta as well. This is not like a one or the other thing. It has to be, how do we get rid of this military? There has to be a package, coordinated plan, coordinated actions. And that is something that we see missing. So you see like one sanction by this country on such and such military companies, but then you see another country taken maybe after way too long joining the ICJ. So what I'm trying to say is that it just taken too long. We know that international law, international justice mechanisms takes time, but are the international actors doing enough? In our opinion, they're not yet. And I think what we want is that's why we are proposing now. I mean, if we see the Security Council will not move because of China and Russia, but then do we just leave it there? In that case, what about the residual power that the United Nations Charter allowed the General Assembly to exercise? For example, setting up an ad hoc tribunal. Yes, we know it takes so much of the political will by all of the majority of the member states of the United Nations. But why the democracy and human rights, like-minded countries are not taking different channels or different ways to do something more? And yeah, I mean, I'll just stop here. It's just, I don't want to continue with my frustration, as you can already hear from me.
Well, I imagine you probably agree with all of that, Wei.
Yeah, definitely. But first, I would like to highlight the case before the International Court of Justice. I think this case is very important for the Rohingya, as Myanmar population as a whole, majority of Myanmar population, political leaders to the military and public, has denied or continue to deny the genocide of the Rohingya, and the harms against the Rohingya cannot be repaired by simply prosecuting the criminals and individual perpetrators. And the state need to take responsibility for the restorative justice. So therefore, I think the support for the International Court of Justice case brought by the Gambia is crucial, and that would lead to the state responsibility, and therefore Rohingya can be able to seek a broader sense of justice and restore their rights and dignity in Burma beyond criminal accountability and beyond restitution. So basically the questions of identity, the belonging, the restorations of ethnic rights and citizenship rights and other related the rights and harms done against the Rohingya. And I think that's why for the Rohingya, this case is very, very important. A lot of the time when we advocate, when international community responds to the situations of Rohingya, they simply look into the narrow versions of criminal accountability or through the lens of human rights. This may not necessarily reflect on the justice that justice that demand by the community itself. So therefore, I think I would like to highlight the importance of the case before the International Court of Justice and the need for the support, the need for the support to this case. As for criminal accountability, as you all know, the current investigations and jurisdiction that International Criminal Court has is limited on Myanmar. Therefore, we need to really push for a more comprehensive criminal justice mechanism and a court of law. And recently, on the 5th anniversary of the Rohingya genocide, August 25th, as Sam has mentioned, UK and Germany has confirmed their intervention to the ICJ case. That is great, but the United States has actually mentioned that in this the State Department statement that they are going to support the calls the calls or the language referring situations of Myanmar to the International Criminal Court. So, which is for us quite unique and new from the country like United States, traditionally conservative on the International Criminal Court. So therefore, I see there is a room at the UN Security Council to push for this. And if not, I mean, we can try, and we have been asking the UK and the US to really introduce a resolution, despite the rejections or vetoes by the Russia and China. We want them to try at least. If they don't succeed one time, and they can try another time, and that's what it is meant to be, and that's what they're supposed to be doing. And alternatively, as Myanmar has mentioned, the General Assembly can also take a leadership to really create an ad hoc tribunal, ad hoc international independent tribunal. And I think only then the work of the IIMM can be effective. Without a court, how do they use these cases and to prosecute, and how long the community need to wait? It has already been 5 years for the Rohingya and more ever since the genocide has started. And it has been for so many decades for many ethnic communities, and now the military is brutalizing the entire country. So basically, while we need a comprehensive international criminal justice processes and a court of law, it is the international community, especially the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly, and member states at the General Assembly can do a lot more to stop the military from committing ongoing human rights, gross human rights in Burma by basically, putting pressure and sanctioning them there and their businesses, and the stop selling the weapon, arms embargo. All of these are the calls which are urgent and necessary to stop the situations on the ground and to protect the people. The Rohingya, while 1 million people are living in Bangladesh, over 600,000 people continue to live in apartheid-like conditions under increasing repressions under the military junta, being criminalized every day for their movement. Every day in the news, you see 50 Rohingya being detained, arrested, and tortured, killed, raped while they are trying to escape this genocide. The situations in Myanmar is urgent. It's not something we're talking about the story in the past, the memories. It's urgent, it's happening now. So they can take action to stop the situation now, and it is total failure in the case of Myanmar. The international community's response has been a total failure.
Thank you very much, Wewe Nu. I'm going to wrap it up now, and I'd like just to thank our speakers, if possible. So thank you very much to Kin Omar, to Wewe Nu, to Sam. Jackie Zalkberg, we would have liked to have heard more from you. We did have some audio issues. Otherwise, we would have got some more questions there. But thank you very much for a very comprehensive panel, and do all think very hard about the legal system and the way in which it's operating in Myanmar and where it can be helped.